Stanislav Petrov, the man who refused to believe nuclear war, had begun the night of September 26, 1983. The world was living through one of the most dangerous periods of the Cold War. Just weeks earlier, the Soviet Union had shot down a Korean passenger plane that had entered its airspace. Everyone on board was killed. Relations between Moscow and Washington were at their worst, and each side expected the other to strike first. That night, Soviet Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov was working inside a secret early warning center near Moscow. His job was to monitor the satellite system designed to detect the launch of American nuclear missiles. Shortly after midnight, a sudden alarm went off. One word appeared on the screen: launch. The system reported that a ballistic missile had been launched from the United States toward the Soviet Union. This was not a drill. According to the instruments, a real nuclear attack had begun. Petrov had to assess the warning quickly and report it to military command. From there, the alert could reach the highest levels of the Soviet government, and the leadership would have only a very short time to decide whether to retaliate before the missile arrived. But Petrov was not convinced. If the United States wanted to start a nuclear war, why would it launch only one missile? A logical first strike would not rely on a single missile. It would involve hundreds of missiles, designed to destroy as many Soviet targets as possible before the Soviet Union could respond. Petrov decided that the system might be wrong, and he told his superiors that the warning was unconfirmed. But moments later, a second missile appeared, then a third, then a fourth, then a fifth. Now the screen was no longer showing a minor error. The system was confirming that 5 American missiles were heading toward the Soviet Union. Lights were flashing, alarms were sounding, and time was running out. Petrov faced 2 possibilities. Either the satellites were wrong, or a nuclear attack had already begun, and he was now delaying the warning his country needed. But he noticed something else. Ground-based radars had not detected any missiles. That was not definitive proof, because radar could not see a missile immediately after launch due to the curvature of the Earth. But the lack of confirmation increased his doubts. Then he returned to the same question: why only 5 missiles? A full-scale American attack would not begin with such a small number. So he stood by his decision, and he recorded the warning as a false alarm. The people inside the center waited through the next few minutes. If the missiles were real, ground radar would begin detecting them as they approached the Soviet Union. But nothing appeared. No missiles, no attack, no explosions. Petrov had been right. Investigators later discovered that the satellite system had detected sunlight reflecting off high-altitude clouds over the United States. The position of the sun, the clouds, and the satellites aligned in a way that caused the computer to interpret the reflection as the glow of a missile launch. The system designed to detect nuclear war had nearly declared its beginning because of sunlight reflecting off clouds. Petrov did not have the authority to launch nuclear weapons, and his report would not have automatically triggered a Soviet attack. But if he had confirmed that the attack was real, the warning could have moved rapidly through the military and political chain of command. And in the fear and tension of 1983, that could have pushed officials toward a catastrophic decision before full confirmation was possible. His decision alone did not guarantee that the world was saved, but it stopped a false warning at the first stage of a chain that could have ended in nuclear war. Petrov had no proof that the machines were wrong. He only saw that the story they were telling did not make sense. And when the computer told him that war had begun, he chose to think before he believed it. Vasili Arkhipov, the man who refused to launch a nuclear torpedo, October 27, 1962. The Cuban Missile Crisis had reached one of its most dangerous moments. The United States had discovered Soviet nuclear missiles in Cuba, and the Soviet Union refused to back down. American ships and aircraft had imposed a naval blockade around the island. At any moment, the confrontation could have turned into nuclear war. Beneath the surface of the sea, the Soviet submarine B-59 was attempting to reach Cuba. It was a diesel-electric submarine, and after remaining underwater for a long period, its batteries began to weaken. The air conditioning had almost stopped working. The temperature inside the submarine rose to suffocating levels. And the air became heavy as carbon dioxide levels increased. Some crew members were close to losing consciousness. But the most dangerous problem was that the submarine had lost contact with Moscow. The crew had no idea what was happening above the surface. Was the crisis still political, or had the war already begun? Outside, American ships detected the submarine, and they began dropping small explosive charges into the water. The U.S. Navy was using them as signals to force the submarine to surface. They were not designed to destroy it, but the Soviet crew did not know that. Inside the submarine, explosions could be heard in every direction. The metal hull shook, and some of the lights went out. To the men trapped inside, it seemed as though the Americans had begun an attack. The submarine's commander, Valentin Savitsky, believed that war may have already broken out above them, and B-59 was carrying a weapon the American ships did not know existed, a torpedo fitted with a nuclear warhead. Its explosive power was close to that of the bomb that destroyed Hiroshima. If it were launched at the American ships, it would kill a large number of sailors and confront the United States with a direct Soviet nuclear attack. According to the most widely accepted accounts of the incident, Savitsky became enraged and decided to prepare the torpedo for launch. But he could not make the decision alone. Launching the nuclear weapon required the approval of 3 officers aboard the submarine: the submarine commander, the political officer, and Vasili Arkhipov, the flotilla commander who was also aboard B-59. The commander was inclined to launch. The political officer agreed, but Arkhipov refused. He understood that what they were hearing might be an attempt to force them to surface, not the beginning of a war. He insisted that they must not launch the weapon before confirming what was happening, and he entered into a heated argument with the commander. The heat was suffocating. Oxygen was limited, and explosions continued around them. Everything inside the submarine was pushing them toward a rapid decision, but Arkhipov held his ground. He convinced the commander to surface instead of launching the torpedo. The submarine finally emerged above the water. American ships surrounded it, but there was no world war. Moscow had not ordered the use of a nuclear weapon, and the charges dropped by the ships had not been the beginning of an attack to destroy the submarine. After some time, B-59 withdrew and returned to the Soviet Union. The world did not learn the full details of what happened until years later. If the nuclear torpedo had been launched, it likely would have destroyed 1 or more American ships. No one can know exactly how the United States would have responded. But during a crisis in which nuclear forces were already at their highest state of readiness, it could have triggered a chain of retaliation that no one would have been able to stop. Vasili Arkhipov did not end the Cuban Missile Crisis by himself, and he could not control every nuclear decision that followed. But inside that submarine, at that moment, he prevented a nuclear weapon from becoming the first one used in the confrontation. A decision made in seconds saved 677 people. January 31st, 2001. 2 Japan Airlines aircraft were flying over Japan. The first was Flight 907, a massive Boeing 747 traveling from Tokyo to Okinawa. There were 427 people on board. The second was Flight 958, a DC-10 arriving from the South Korean city of Busan and heading toward Narita Airport near Tokyo. There were 250 people on board. Altogether, 677 people were in the air. None of the passengers on either aircraft knew that their flight paths were converging on the same point. Inside an air traffic control center, a trainee controller was monitoring the 2 aircraft under the supervision of an instructor. Flight 907 was climbing. Flight 958 was traveling in the opposite direction. One aircraft was supposed to pass safely above the other, but because of an air traffic control error and confusion between the two flight numbers, the distance between the aircraft began shrinking rapidly. At first, nothing seemed unusual inside the passenger cabins. People were sitting in their seats, some were eating, others were looking out the windows. But inside the cockpits, a sudden warning appeared. Both aircraft were equipped with a system known as TCAS. It monitors nearby aircraft and gives pilots urgent instructions when it detects a risk of collision. On Flight 907, the system issued a command to climb. On the other aircraft, it issued a command to descend. Had both pilots followed those opposite instructions, the aircraft would have moved safely away from each other. But at the same moment, air traffic control instructed Flight 907 to descend. The captain was suddenly faced with two conflicting commands. The computer was saying, climb. Air traffic control was saying, descend. The pilot followed the controller's instruction and began descending, but Flight 958 was following its collision avoidance warning and was descending as well. Instead of separating, the two aircraft were now moving toward the same altitude. Each plane was traveling at hundreds of kilometers per hour, and the distance between them was disappearing within seconds. Then the captain of Flight 907 saw the other aircraft directly ahead. There was no longer time to contact air traffic control and no time to debate which instruction was correct. He forced the nose of the aircraft downward and carried out a steep dive to avoid the collision. Inside the cabin, passengers and unsecured objects were thrown upward. Some people struck the ceiling. Food carts overturned, and a large number of passengers and crew members were injured, but the aircraft continued descending. At the last moment, it passed beneath the other plane. Accident reports indicate that the distance between the two aircraft at their closest point was terrifyingly small, with some estimates placing it at only about 10 meters. Almost nothing for two enormous aircraft moving at such speed. Just a few more seconds would have been enough to cause a mid-air collision. A collision between one aircraft carrying 427 people and another carrying 250, but the planes never touched. The crew of Flight 907 regained control of the aircraft. It then returned to Haneda Airport in Tokyo. Flight 958 continued its journey and landed safely. No one died in the incident, but around 100 people were injured because of the violent maneuver, some of them seriously. An investigation was launched to determine how two aircraft had come so dangerously close. It revealed that a chain of errors had occurred inside the air traffic control center. The two flight numbers had been confused. One aircraft had been given an instruction that directly contradicted the collision avoidance system, and the mistake was not corrected until the aircraft were already extremely close. The incident reinforced a rule that became critically important in aviation. When the collision avoidance system issues an urgent command, pilots must follow it, even if it conflicts with instructions from air traffic control. Because the controller sees aircraft on a screen, but the system inside the plane continuously calculates the other aircraft's position, direction, and speed in real time. Frances Kelsey, the woman who stopped a drug that was deforming children. The year was 1960. An application for a new drug arrived at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. Its trade name in the United States was Kevidon. Its active ingredient was called thalidomide. At the time, the drug was not new to the world. Since 1957, it had been sold in West Germany and other countries as a sedative and sleeping aid. Some pregnant women also took it to relieve nausea and vomiting during pregnancy. The American company seeking approval was confident that the drug would be accepted. After all, it was already being used in dozens of countries. But the application was assigned to a new employee at the agency, a physician and pharmacologist named Frances Kelsey. She had joined the FDA only a few weeks earlier, and the thalidomide application was one of the first cases she was assigned to review. She could have approved it quickly, but Kelsey noticed a problem. The company claimed the drug was safe, but the evidence it submitted was not strong enough to prove it. The studies were not convincing enough to reassure her. And there was no clear evidence showing that the drug was safe for pregnant women or unborn children. Then another warning appeared. Medical reports from Britain were linking thalidomide to cases of nerve damage in some users. For Kelsey, the question was simple. If the drug could affect the nerves of an adult, what could it do to a fetus whose organs were still developing? So she refused to approve it, and she asked the company to provide stronger studies and more reliable data. But the company did not back down. It resubmitted the application. Its representatives repeatedly contacted the FDA, and they complained that Kelsey was delaying the drug's release without sufficient reason. The delay was costing the company money, and it believed the enormous American market was waiting. But Kelsey held her ground. She did not claim that the drug caused birth defects. She did not know that yet. All she said was that the company had failed to prove that it was safe. Over the following months, the disaster began to emerge in Europe. Doctors in Germany and Australia noticed an unusual increase in babies being born with rare congenital deformities. Some children were born with extremely shortened limbs. Others were born without complete sections of their arms or legs. Damage also appeared in the ears, eyes, heart, and other internal organs. Then doctors began to identify the common link. Many of the mothers of these children had taken thalidomide during the first weeks of pregnancy. This was the critical period when the fetus's limbs and major organs were developing. In late 1961, the drug was withdrawn from the German market, but by then, the damage had already been done. Historical estimates suggest that more than 10,000 children around the world were born with deformities linked to thalidomide. A large number of them were in Germany, Britain, and other countries where the drug had been approved for sale. In the United States, thalidomide never received official approval. But before the final decision was made, the company had distributed millions of tablets to doctors for experimental use. The drug reached approximately 20,000 patients, including hundreds of pregnant women, so the United States did not escape completely. Around 17 known cases were recorded of American children born with deformities linked to thalidomide, but that number was far lower than what might have happened if the drug had become widely available in American pharmacies. In August 1962, U.S. President John F. Kennedy honored Frances Kelsey with the President's Award for Distinguished Federal Civilian Service, but the greatest impact of her decision was not the award. The thalidomide scandal helped transform drug laws in the United States. Afterward, pharmaceutical companies were required to provide stronger evidence proving not only that a drug was safe, but also that it was effective before it could be approved for sale.